I'll kick it off and share a little bit about something exciting that we're working on. Of course, everybody's talking about large language models. It's very relevant. And we're also working on stuff. So we are developing a cool course around this. Let's go to the next one. Boom. Yeah. So our course announcements, it's about prompt engineering to boost conversation design, right? So we see this world where, large language models for a large part now for people working at enterprises trying to create chatbots and voice applications, these large language models are a way to increase your productivity. So we're going to look at it from that perspective. And in this course, the first thing we'll do is really take an integral perspective on what large language models are and how they are going to transform your organization, whether you are a hospital, whether you are an enterprise, whether you are a government that wants to talk to its citizens, right? So how does this influence individuals' mindset? Well, the inner world of people, large language models are going to transform how your employees are going to consume knowledge and how they're going to educate themselves and how they're going to learn new stuff. It's also going to help them in their decision-making process that is going to be very influenced by these large language models, because all of a sudden they have all these variations, all these questions they can ask. So they're much better educated in their decision-making. And of course, large language models help with creativity, right? So if you're stuck trying to do something, you can ask ChatGPT 20 different ways of doing something. So it's going to boost creativity as well. So that's the inner world of individuals. Then we'll talk about the outer world of individuals, the skill set and the behavior. They're going to be using this to do prompt engineering and, get knowledge. That's the new skill set, to get knowledge from these models. But also when you then get the assistance output, how do you curate that? What's the human supervision? How do you design that into whatever it needs to be? For us, most relevant is conversation design, of course. How do you then turn that into a good chatbot or a voice application? But also a lot of your other tasks around you as a conversational AI practitioner have to do with automation. Then we talk about the organization, how does it influence decision-making at an enterprise level? How does it shape the collective identity of your organization? If all of a sudden our entire organization is transformed through large language models, what does that mean for who we are, our identity and our culture? And of course, the power dynamics, all of a sudden it's shifting because, management is also going to give power to large language models. Yeah. We don't know, probably not next week, but in the foreseeable future. And then, of course, the systems, how does this transform our technology stack, our organization, the distribution of resources? Because all of a sudden, where does the LLM sit in your organization? Are you going to have an LLM department that feeds into the conversational AI department, or are they the same? And those are some of the questions we'll be exploring. And then the main thing, in this new course on large language models here at CDI is, going through the entire CDI workflow and looking at, where can these large language models support you? If you can go to the next one, Willem. Yeah, because at the end of the day, what we see is, if you know what you're doing, large language models are going to help you do it better. Right? If you don't really know what you're doing, you're only going to get so far. So we're still staying true to, the CDI workflow, because we can use a large language model to figure out what our use cases are within our operation. We can ask questions about what kind of technology stack I should have, how do I write to code to actually make these integrations? But also, if I want to know more stuff about my audience, I can ask questions or create biographies about the people our system is going to interact with. And large language models can help us create tone of voice, can create background identities for our bot personas. Also, when we mentalize the conversations and we think about, what does it mean for someone to interact with this chatbot? How might they feel? There is a wealth of knowledge in large language models that we can use as conversation designers to create better stuff. We can use it to create first drafts. We can use that, to validate our designs by having it run tests with the model. And of course, how would our persona say this? How can we rewrite it? Can you write it in a simpler way so we can elevate the design using large language models? And then we're going to go into the build phase. And that's kind of the focus of today. that Willem is going to talk about. How do I use large language models to train and test and optimize my chatbot? Right. So we're not just necessarily running an LLM through our chatbots, but how do I use LLMs to increase the productivity of me as an AI trainer? So all of those steps will kind of be part of that new course. First, the integral perspective, then the entire CDI workflow. And I think what we arrive at, and we'll talk about that today as well, is that if you look at, your time to market, because when we do a conversational AI project, what you're looking for is to ship quickly. Your time to value is important. So you want to be quick. So there's time and there's value creation. Large language models allow us to create something much faster that is definitely valuable. But if you don't have a professional using the LLM and actually working with it, in a pleasant way, working in harmony with human supervision, you're leaving a lot of value on the table, right? So if you take the LLM, you're going to go to market quickly, you're going to get value. But then if you have an expert that truly knows what they're doing, they're really going to amplify the value creation process of these large language models. So this is kind of, how we see that now. And we'll talk about that a little later more. So thank you all for being here. It's really cool to have that many people here. So I'm going to give the floor to Willem, who's going to talk us through his presentation. And at the end, I'll come back again and we'll have a little bit of chat and answer some questions. Enjoy.
Awesome. Thank you, Hans. And thanks everyone for joining in. Hello, students. Hello, other people, non-CDI students. Expert class on large language models, how to empower the AI trainer. Well, in the next 30 minutes, I will not be able to address any type of use or all possible use cases. So I and my colleagues that helped me with this presentation and Hans, we had to make some tough choices. And what we tried to do in this next presentation is show you our thought process on how to get the most value out of these LLMs within the space of the AI trainer. And I'd like to think that some of these lessons can also be applied to conversation design or even to non-conversational AI use cases. So the way of thinking, like, how do I use these LLMs? How do I interact with them to then get, time savings or better quality or both? And I really like in this slide as well, that those two lines, right? Those two arrows saying over time, what the LLM can do will increase. We've already seen that in the last few months where, for instance, in November, ChatGPT based on GPT 3.5 happened. And then a few months later, we already have an iteration that is improved in many ways. And then I also like the second arrow. And again, this comes to the quote that we've heard a lot, an LLM will not replace your job. Someone using an LLM will replace your job. And that's probably those two arrows. As large language models get better at their job, the experts that employ them also get better or have time to really focus on those things that humans are specifically still very good at compared to LLMs. So, for those of, I think most of the people in this call are quite familiar with large language models, and because it's obviously been, the talk of the town for the last 4 or 5 months. But we just started this again with, okay, what are these large language models again? And for the sake of brevity, we went with ChatGPT. So that's the interface, of course, not the large language model itself, but it's an interface to one of the large language models. And one of the things that struck me when we asked ChatGPT to explain itself briefly is I'm kind of like a big book with lots of information, and there's something there. Books often are not just collection of facts. There's also a reasoning that the author is bringing to it. And that's probably what we're all grappling with now, is that these large language models, there is some sort of reasoning, but how good is that reasoning? And, and also what are its limitations? And in other words, seeing these large language models as purely just a whole bunch of facts all crammed into one interface, and then you can just pull the fact out when you need it and be on your way. I think is not taking advantage of the true value. Also because right now, when it comes to hard facts, these large language models tend to hallucinate versus traditional online search, for instance, or traditional just looking up books in the library. And I actually, this is something that the CEO of OpenAI said last week in an interview. And you see there the parentheses with the 3 dots, and that's where that's where he explains that, okay, it's some definition of reasoning, but it's obviously not near as good as humans. And you could even argue about the definition of reasoning, right? Is being able to summarize a text half decent. Is that reasoning? And my point is that I agree, it is a part of, it's a form of reasoning. Anyway, so that's some of the insights that for those of you, for maybe some of you, this is not really that enlightening, but some of you that view these LLMs as just repositories of a lot of facts, there's actually more to gain from them. And I think in those use cases where there's simple reasoning involved, that's where the LLM can really shine. So let's have a look at some of the use cases that we used. First, a little disclaimer. Enterprises are right now looking, okay, how can we reduce or improve productivity, or even just completely wipe out a whole department because we just let a large language model do it. Right now, that's obviously not yet, or to me, obviously, and I think to those of you that follow the news regularly on this, not yet feasible. So there's a lot of these cool things, these use cases for conversational AI, for instance, when it comes to prompt chaining or other more advanced uses of these large language models. And we're all very excited about getting there. But to really get there in an enterprise setting, there's a lot of kinks that still need to be worked out. And in this session, we will not be working them out. So one of the things, so this is, for instance, a screenshot of an article on an interface for prompt chaining. So for those of you that haven't heard of the phrase, what this means is one prompt, you can prompt a large language model to give you an answer. But if you chain multiple of these, either consecutively or at the same time, the gains in productivity can be that much higher because you're not just sending one message back and forth, you're chaining a bunch. So what struck me on this, and this also on this image actually, is that I was thinking, hey, I'm looking at another flow diagram. And obviously it's a flow diagram that's way more dynamic than perhaps traditional AI assistant flow diagrams that we all design and implement. But there is a similar thought process, and hence also a similar skill process involved. Prompt chaining is not the same as designing a traditional dialogue, but I would argue it is somewhat the same. And if you have the skills of one, then you're likely going to be better at the other as well. So like I said, there are some challenges in completely reimagining, in this case, conversational AI, making these big leaps. And here we've briefly just mentioned a few. We like to think of this as a choice between a slow evolution or a fast revolution, or augmenting existing steps in your workflow versus reimagining entire swath of your workflow, or either completely throwing that out. So you would think again, yeah, why do it slow when you can do it fast? Why start with training phrase generation when you can just be gone with traditional intent training, and hook, like it says here, hook your large language model up to a knowledge base and let it figure out, how to match incoming questions. But we actually think that for most people working in conversational AI, whether you're a freelancer, whether you're working at a company, it's actually smart to go slow, to rather go slow than go fast at first. Figure really out, okay, what is the practical implication right now? What can I get? What kind of value can I get right now? Because what we've seen is when you take that approach, after a few iterations, after a few experiments, after getting your first wins from it, you'll start to automatically see, how can I improve on this process further? How can I let the LLM take on more of the work? Anyway, I like an iterative approach in general in life. So maybe this is also a little bit biased, but we like to go slow to go fast. So one of the other ways to understand all these different uses that you can get out of large language models is just to plot them on a risk-reward type graph. And I've called it here, or we've called it here, risk/mitigation, because if a certain use case has a high risk, then if you're in an enterprise setting, that's not really acceptable. So it just doesn't just mean, oh, it's high risk. No, it means there's more effort involved in mitigating those high risks. And the reward can be both, you know, whether that's time saving or whether that's perhaps a better quality than what you and your human colleagues would produce. So, well, you know, for AI trainers, the most obvious one is generating training phrases. And those of you, again, that have followed the news already a bit have seen that a bunch of platforms are already helping you with this out of the box. And actually, when I saw all of this, and I looked at what these platforms can generate in terms of training phrases, I was thinking, I can see a few things that are wrong with it, but actually it's okay, especially for a first iteration, right? Let's just generate the training phrases. And then I was thinking, am I just being highly critical because my job is being automated? So as we develop this presentation towards all of you, I had a bit of a, I wasn't sure if I could trust my own judgment for a moment, because I thought, is my ego just acting up and saying like, oh, well, yeah, those training phrases, I guess they look okay, but if you really look at them, they're not that great. And well, it led me actually to think that, well, let me come back to that thought for a second. Let me first finish this graph for all of us. So another, little bit more risky use case of these large language models is to help with various types of functional testing.
Oh no, we lost Willem. An LLM took his place. That is strange. He's just talking about job loss and he's losing connection, but he said he had a backup Wi-Fi because sometimes his Wi-Fi is a little shaky. And
Hey,
he's back.
guys. Yeah, I'm back. Oh, it's my Wi-Fi? Yeah, it wasn't saying so.
I don't know.
And I have our colleagues in my chat as well saying, you're offline. So apologies, everyone. I'm going to switch to different Wi-Fi.
Yeah, we lost you after the intro. No.
That's not a joke. That's not funny. Okay, let me push here, edit.
Get some slides. I did see, by the way, we forgot to kind of like, we started talking. We didn't really introduce ourselves. Somebody asked like, who are we? Which I think is a fair question. So for people that don't know us, because we have a lot of people here because we've opened it up. So there's a lot of people that have no idea who we are. So my name is Hans van Dam. I'm one of the founders of Conversation Design Institute. So we train and certify people working in conversational AI around the world. And we have a few organizations. We have CDI Foundation, which is a nonprofit where we figure out what the best practices are together with the industry. Then we have Conversation Design Institute, where we teach and certify people on these best practices. And then there is CDI Services. That's the company that Willem works for. That actually it's a great consulting firm that helps enterprises deliver value through conversational AI. So perhaps you want to say a few more words about yourself, Willem, as well. Any hobbies or things. But yeah, I saw the question in the chat. It's like, yes, fair enough. Who are we? Who are these people? Why are they talking about this stuff?
Yeah, that's fair. But I'm actually not going to address it. I'm going to be a mystery to those of you that have never been in an expert class or a meeting with me. Because what I really want to do is get through this nice presentation that we all spent so much effort on. Functional testing, we think in the future there's going to be improvements there, but there's already tools out there to automate parts of your testing. of your functional testing anyway. So it's LLMs are already up against something that is already working to some extent quite well. And also, yeah, it's going to be hard to get those to work on at scale. Without really diving too much into that, I want to look at another one. So assisted intent matching. What we mean by that is a multitude of ways to assist your traditional intent model. For instance, one of the things that I've heard is to check when a customer asks something that is very long, very verbose, to ask the LLM to summarize it and then run it through your intent model. Or for things like long tail questions, where the intent model is quite clear or quite certain that it's likely not a question that it has covered in the intent model. So those are also interesting ones that we expect impact from right now. The challenge with these is really to pick one problem that you're currently facing with your intent model, to try and fix that again. That's again the go slow to go fast approach, and not say like, oh, well, let's first let it take over the entire intent matching and then just see where it fails, and then we slowly bring the intent matching back. Another one that's possibly going to be huge in the future, and some platforms already allow it or already help you do that, is to automatically implement dialogues that you or your colleagues have designed. So in other words, you design it perhaps in voice flow or in some sheet or whatever, and it automatically generates the flow diagram or the other elements needed to represent that dialogue in the system. The challenge with using that is that an LLM might hallucinate based on your design and might start to introduce or omit certain things that are key. For instance, certain repair flows. It might be a bit more liberal with your persona than you'd like. So there's actually the work that you save in not having to implement something is work that you then immediately get by having to review it. Now it can still save you time, but it's not necessarily gonna be a big return on investment, I guess, so to speak. And there's a risk that even though you've reviewed it, it's still going to contain major errors, whether that's factual errors, persona, design errors, functionally. Again, these repair flows not existing or not working properly. So the last bubble that I'm throwing on here, blind test generation, that's one that we'll dive in a little bit more today. Because what we expect is there to be a pretty high reward versus the risk that you're getting. And let's do a quick refresher for those of you that are not familiar with what blind testing really is. Blind testing is sort of the way to measure how, the quality of the cognition of your model. So how well is your AI assistant at finding the correct answer to a question? It does that quantitatively, and it does that by using preferably 1,000 or more labeled real customer questions. And the labeling especially takes time. So, we always have the rule of thumb that if you want to run a blind test and for that you need to label 1,000 customer questions, it takes you 10 hours, roughly. It might even be 15 if you have a quite complex model. It might be a little bit less, but it's usually just 10 hours. And preferably you want to do that, preferably even every 2 weeks. However, because it's, almost no project has one AI trainer that available that can spend 10 hours every 2 weeks labeling. Most of the projects anyway don't have that. So what happens is you can do it once every 2 months or once every quarter, if at all. And then, this great resource for making your cognition better, you don't have that, or you hardly have that, and you're not able to improve the cognition of your bot at the same speed. Well, yeah, let's put it to the test. Let's see how ChatGPT in this case, ChatGPT, we are using that LLM for this example. A normal blind test procedure is basically these 3 steps. There are some other ways to do it, but again, for the sake of brevity, gathering a random sample, labeling all of them, and then verifying, if your AI assistant found the same label as you or your human colleague found. Well, maybe going back for a bit. Of these 3 steps, the second step in our approach takes the longest, like I said, right? That's the labeling step that tends to take 9 or 10 hours for 1,000 labels, for instance. The first step doesn't necessarily take a lot of time. You usually have your chat logs that you can filter through. The third step, again, doesn't necessarily take up a lot of time because you can usually automate that step. If it isn't already apparent because you've used chat logs, so if it isn't already apparent because you already see what your AI assistant originally matched this question, or AKA labeled this question, this incoming question to. So step 2, that will be really where the big time saving would be. But actually we wanted to check and if perhaps number 1 could also be automated. In other words, not gathering real customer questions, but gathering AI generated questions by an LLM. There would be some benefits to that approach as well, which I'll get to a bit later. So this workflow that I'm going to put on here, these 4 steps, they are in no way a definitive workflow. This is what we found that works for us. And again, I have reason to believe this probably translates to other LLM, you experimenting with other use cases for LLMs. And the first one, both Hans and I alluded to it earlier. If you're trying to automate a manual process and you don't have a lot of experience with that manual process, then you're probably not going to automate it very well. And this is, for me, this was actually the biggest learning or the most key point, because as I was saying earlier, I wasn't sure if my expertise was really useful anymore in 2, 6, or 12 months from now. And I'd like to think that it still is. And probably you'd like to think that your expertise is still relevant. And I happen to believe it's still relevant, and mainly for this point. Maybe to hammer the point, to bring a point home. I've sometimes written marketing copy, right, in past jobs. So I'd like to think I can do some marketing copy. So why not ask an LLM then to write it for me? And as I was thinking through this, I realized, hey, back in the day, we had this format for marketing copy, IDA, probably you've heard of, or sales copy. Some of you might have heard of it. It's a way of structuring a sales message or a marketing message. And then I was thinking, wait, well, I haven't done this for ages, so maybe there are improvements on that. I don't know. I'm just going to assume like, oh, I'm going to make a prompt chain for marketing copy. And instead of just saying, hey, write marketing copy, I'm going to say, hey, write marketing copy using the IDA format. But I'm not going to be able to really judge, in which part of that format an LLM really did a great job. So anyway, sorry to hammer this point down, but this was for me, perhaps for those of you watching and for whom this is new, this is for me the biggest takeaway from this presentation. Well, since you know the manual process inside out, then you can figure out which steps you want an LLM to assist with. And once you know that, then you can figure out, okay, how many prompts do I need? And you can start the process. So for us, we started with the first prompt that we could imagine that was needed in this sequence of activities. And then we could already see if the output of that first prompt was any good. Before we did the entire chain, we want to make sure that at least the first step gets a nice result, because probably the more prompt chains and more steps after each other, bigger the chain, the likelier that quality will do great at each step. Sorry. So the other thing here, prompt interfaces. So those of you that are familiar with ChatGPT probably are familiar with ChatGPT, the interface, the standard interface, their website, where you have the little text box that you can type something in, and then ChatGPT responds, and then you type a response if you want, or you open a new chat. But by now there are other interfaces, and they can help you slim down, for instance, your prompt, allowing you to actually cram more information into a prompt than currently is possible in ChatGPT, or be just useful in other ways. So in our case, well, actually, I'll get to an example of a different prompt interface in a bit. Well, once we've run this prompt chain perhaps once, and we're happy with the individual prompts, they seem to all be putting out good output. Then we want to compare the end result to what a human or a manual output process would do. And even if the manual, or even if the output or the quality of the output is not as great, there are ways to mitigate this. Like it says here, update your workflow. And I'll give an example when we get there on how we did that for blind testing. So this is the workflow that we figured works for now. And again, like I said, perhaps it'll change. Perhaps this will not be needed 2 months from now. That's the challenge with an LLM presentation. Right. So blind testing with ChatGPT. This is the first prompt that we arrived at for generating questions that might actually be asked by human customers. So that's the first step, right? We have to gather test questions. And the idea of a blind test is that it's blind because the test questions were never seen by both the intent matching algorithm and actually also not by the AI trainer, by the human. So yeah, hence blind. And so we checked and we prompted this to ChatGPT. Now there's a few interesting things here. So for instance, one limitation is that we found that we could ask for 50 questions. And if we ask for much more, then the model, the response would start to get a little weird. Now, again, this can be easily resolved by either, asking the prompt again separately, or by more tweaking to the prompt. And we're all still, we're investigating all of this yet. But there's, when you're designing prompts like this, my personal approach is to change one element at a time and see what happens, and also open this in a new chat in the case that you're using the ChatGPT standard interface. So that's why, the 50, actually the fact that it could output 50 common questions based on this prompt, I was happy with the amount of 50, and I was more focused on getting the quality of those questions good. So one other cool thing that we found, and I want to sit on this for a bit longer, is the words common question and then at the end informal. So what we found initially, we just asked the question, just give me 50 common questions that customers would ask a customer service chatbot, and write them in Mexican Spanish. So the whole middle section here was actually not wasn't actually not there, and it did a great job. It gave 50 questions that, from our experience, we know are indeed common. So again, because we had the experience, we could verify that this output was actually relevant. We didn't have to guess. But we saw that the output was good, but we could have never really written it in this way ourselves, because we, as humans working on a project, we're much too focused, much too tunnel focused on things, and it's very hard to put yourself in the customer's shoes. That goes for all professionals. So we just used the word common questions, and we didn't use the word informal. And what it outputted were very grammatically sound, long questions. And for those of you who look at chat logs, sometimes you know that people tend not to use high school Mexican Spanish in this case, or English. They are in a hurry, or at least they're not necessarily looking to show off their language skills. They just want to get something done, so they quickly type what they want to know. However, by adding the word informal, it will already improved a lot. And let me show you a bit of an example here. So this is some of the output that we got from this prompt. And even if you don't understand Spanish, you can see the translations on the right there. you can see that it's quite to the point questions that it outputs. And just by changing the prompt, adding the word informal, it picked up on that. And we get to a larger point here, and one that I'm not sure of, but that's my hypothesis, and I'm curious what other people think. But I think that in some cases, your prompt should not be too specific. You should sort of allow these LLMs to read between the lines, or to take a generic instruction and run with it. Because we've actually seen the opposite as well, where we were very specific and asking, we want exactly this, and then the output failing to always supply that. So if you give it a very strict rule, if I would have asked, for instance, give me 50 common questions, but they have to be 10 words or longer. Now, this wasn't an exact prompt that we used, but I know from other ones that we tried, it will not only not follow that, also the overall quality seems to also be a bit weird, because it seems to me that the LLM tries to read between the lines and tries to think, something that's more than 10 words, what does that mean? What can I do with that? Instead of simply follow the instructions. Some of the other cool things here that really mattered. Obviously, it's good to make clear, okay, who is the person speaking that? Well, customers, what is their role? You could also have, of course, internal colleagues, or another type of human asking the question. What is the overall business case or the overall use case of the AI assistant? Well, in this case, customer service. And what type of organization does it represent? Again, we can go much deeper with this, right? We might add the persona, or we might add the exact spot on the website where this AI assistant is, or if it's not the website, the channel that it lives on. But I was surprised to see that it gave this such relevant output with these generic instructions. And finally, what I did see in initial iterations is that without adding this second sentence, so the sentence starting with most of these customers have already placed an order. When we didn't have that in there, it would put out a bunch of relevant questions to the briefing. So it was following the briefing correctly, but then we realized, hey, this specific AI system that we're doing this for lives in a very specific spot in the customer journey, and we need to brief the LLM on the specific spot of the customer, the specific spot in the customer journey. So I think that was a nice find. So I'm happy to highlight that. Finally, Mexican Spanish. I asked a colleague who lives in Mexico, who's Mexican, to review these, and they said, yeah, it's perfectly fine. So again, this is we're not doing university level research here, but we do check our statements. So when it comes specifically to generating test phrases, test questions, the things that we found, it's better at this than I would be, or I would say you would be, unless maybe you're a media customer service agent talking to customers every day. But I've actually talked to customer service agents, and they know a lot more about what the customer is going through. But asking them to sort of give an overview is usually not working out. So in other words, I haven't met any human that could do this as good as an LLM, other than just compiling the real customer's questions. So the ultimate benefit of generating this is that it allows you to also run a blind test before you even go live, which is always a bit of an icky spot for new projects, right? Are you confident enough to go live? Well, you do a soft landing, but still you get your managers to say, hey, I asked it this and it completely didn't understand me. And so this way you can reduce that risk. But finally, we haven't been able to make the LLM generate questions that are as weird and as long tail and as out there and as verbose or as short as how humans, as the complete repertoire of how humans tend to talk to AI assistants. So even though it will be a nice blind test, it will not be as relevant as the real customer questions. So the next step, because even though, you know, apart from the last thing, we still think there's a use case for generating these test questions. So we went on to the next step, labeling. Then we found that we had to do some preparation to actually make this work. So one of the interesting things that we found is that we actually didn't have to, or even in our prompt didn't need to brief it on the intent. So we ended up removing the training phrases. As example, we ended up removing a description, a sentence explaining each intent that it would try to label, that it should label to. And we found that just by having descriptive intent names, it was sort of, again, seemingly given the space to imagine a bit. And these things like to imagine, you sort of can't block them from imagining, or what we humans like to call hallucinating. And of course, you know, if you have a mature model, then there are certain intents that are basically asking for the same thing, but you've decided to split them because they're so popular and there's two distinct ways that your customers are asking for them. Yeah, that's very hard for an LLM, also for a human AI trainer to keep separate. You know, we haven't tried it yet properly with hierarchies, intent hierarchies. Again, that's maybe a bit of a tall order. Finally, yeah, the fourth one, in our case, we used an Excel extension, an Excel integration, so that we could run these prompts within an Excel sheet. And we could basically say, hey, well, we'll see it here. The question in cell A, can you label one of the following intents to it? And then you could run down the list, because we initially just used a ChatGPT interface, standard interface, but it didn't properly work. I'm not gonna dwell too much on this one, except that the funny thing was initially it struggled with labeling stuff as out of scope. So it would just try to find some intent that was half relevant. But as soon as actually we reduced the briefing of intent names, and we added the option to, if it's unsure, to just put a few labels in, it also got better at selecting out of scope. So I'm starting to wrap up now. So let's get the goods. Let's see what actually, you know, how good did this perform versus how human AI trainers would run these would run these blind tests. No, in total it was 177 intents, which is already quite a mature bot and already quite tricky even for a human. And also humans don't agree with each other often on labels or on a subset of labels. So that's why, in my opinion, humans at most can be 95% correct at each incoming question, at labeling that correctly. There are ways, of course, to mitigate that, but it's good to keep in mind that even humans are not, you know, human language is so vague that even we can't be trusted to always get the right label. And sometimes, apart from human language being vague, sometimes we just zone out for a minute and we think we double click on the intent, or we add it by accident to the wrong line. So that's why we have 85 to 95% correct labels. So generated questions, 50 generated questions. After about 7 iterations on the second prompt, we were able to get to a 78% correct labeled question, in our opinion, right? That of me and my colleagues. And we did give it the allowance so that when it outputted a few labels, that if the winner was in there, we counted that as a win. Because, you know, it just means that the trainer would have to come in and check those and improve those, but it's already nice if there's been some pre-work done. So 78%, it's not as good as humans, but we think with a few more iterations, we'll actually get pretty close to the 85 already. Now, we also gave it a harder test. We also took 98 real customer questions for the same briefing, and we had a look at how well it does at labeling that with the same prompt that we used. And there we saw that, yeah, as you can see, the performance there was quite a bit lower. We haven't been able to do a lot of iterations there. So perhaps the prompt just needs to be different. Perhaps we need to say, hey, first clean up, first reduce the size of all of these, summarize all of these. Perhaps it will do better at that point. We don't know yet. But there is definitely a way to go before that becomes half decent and half useful. Hey, I see I didn't properly edit my slides here. Anyway, the benefit, I see one big benefit to labeling with ChatGPT or other LLMs, and that is that you can do the first pass at a big set of labels and reduce time in that way. So what that would mean, for instance, let's say you have 1,000 questions, you can let ChatGPT already do some labels, and then you can organize it based on the intent that it found. And then you just say, oh yeah, I have 50 utterances that ChatGPT says go to intent number X. So let me think of intent number X, and I'll just go, yes, no, yes, yes, no, yes, 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 no. It's quicker. It's quicker than if you have to switch context all the time as the labeler and have to always imagine all of the 100 or 200 intents that you have to label. And of course, the big pitfall, it's not yet as accurate. And that is it for me. We have 10 minutes left.
So yes, thank you so much. Let's, oh, you're dehydrated. You want to drop the slide so people can see a bigger version of us?
Yes.
It makes us feel big. Thank you so much, Willem, and thank you everybody for putting stuff here in the chat as well. So we've got questions in the QA. We've got some questions that were just in the chat. I've been keeping track a little bit. Some basic things that I saw people were interested in. It came up a few times. Is there going to be a recording? Yes, I'm pretty. Yeah, I see a red little thing that we are in fact recording. Just go to cdi.cx, sign up there as a student. You'll get access to it. Everybody that is on this call will get an email with a link to that recording as well. So that should be fairly simple. Also, what I kind of liked about the presentation is like the the project with the international sports brand, where you just see like these things are already in use, right? This is a client that we work with for a very long time, and you can start incorporating this stuff already. So also if you're an enterprise and you're watching this and you're looking like, okay, where do I start? Because you can go all in and then just throw LLMs at everything, but that's probably not the wisest thing to do. And there's just very small things that you can already do. So if you want some help and guidance on that, just let us know, shoot us an email, and we're happy to have a chat about that, of course. There's a thing about how is this going to transform contact centers, right? And I think that's a very nice question that somebody had, or kind of a reason of being here. And I think it's the same conversation as conversational AI in general, right? What's the problem that you're solving in a contact center is, you're dealing with scarcity of labor. Like most customer service agents, 50% of them say they want to quit within 18 months. So you need to build up a digital workforce. People like digital channels and want to have that more automated if it's done properly. And you're taking out a lot of repetitive tasks. Well, so it's nicer for agents because they can add value in live conversations. So far, the problem was always that it was very difficult to build all of that, to map all of those intents and to train those things. So now with large language models, that makes it easier to transform the contact center in the way that you probably already had on your roadmap. Right. So all of the things that we talk about here, those things are things that need to be done, in contact center automation. So this is just another piece in that bigger puzzle. If there's anything you'd like to add to that, Willem?
No, I'm just looking at a bunch of questions. I'm thinking, how we're gonna answer that. So what should we say?
Yeah, how do we do that? How do we do that? I also like the one, can we limit our chatbot? So if we integrate it, if we would take an LLM, we just plug it in, we give it a web widget, and people can now start asking questions. Because that's also one of the things that, this revolution, ChatGPT was the fastest growing product in the history of probably the universe. Because if you say Earth, that's true. Universe, I'm willing to roll the dice on that. So that means that people are reaching out to businesses with different expectations now, right? Imagine if you're a doctor and now people do the research beforehand, have all the references, and they check in with you, and they expect you to know all that stuff. So people have a much higher expectation now when they check in with you. So can we just unleash a large language model that talks about all our stuff? And it's one of the things, like there's a few questions and comments in the chat that all kind of relate to that. Can we just have it interact with our customers? Then we integrate it into our knowledge base, which is already possible to a certain extent. So it could just search for the answers. That's not that difficult. Can we then say what is in and out of scope? Yes, you can, have requirements for the content that you would want to have. You could engineer those prompts in a way and give guidance that we only answer those things. So there's sorry, this is out of scope. I only know stuff about, what's in this knowledge base, and I can talk about the weather or whatever. The challenge becomes, and that's, a challenge that you see in conversational AI in general. Like we've got the technology, but now we want to build it in, we want to integrate into the backend. We want to become more transactional. That's still the same hurdle that you're going to have. Right. So if you now would just deploy a large language model and you capture more stuff, you can answer more stuff, you're still not unlocking all the value. You're still going to be dealing with, your development teams internally at an enterprise and their roadmaps and their backlogs and all of that stuff. To be transactional, that is the extra step, which doesn't really depend on the advancement of the technology, but on, the resources that you have as an enterprise. So I've thought that was something I wanted to, how I wanted to respond to that. Is there anything you'd like to add to that, Willem?
Yeah, so for those type of implementations where you just hook up a large language model to a knowledge base, what we're looking now with some of our clients is to do proof of concepts, but then we really limit it at first to internal AI assistants, because your employees are a little bit more wiser than perhaps your customers, so there's a little bit less things that can go wrong in case that the AI assistant says something incorrect or something factually incorrect. And then also realize that at first those bots will be FAQ style bots only, so they'll just be feeding facts back and forth. Still could still be a great AI assistant, but for some of the more mature projects, especially if they're customer facing, we expect that the difference between design quality of your LLM component and what you've already have designed as conversation design is going to be a bit too big for now, for the way they work now. So we're still experimenting, we're still figuring this out. There's ways to mitigate some of these risks.
Yeah, is prompt engineering, this shows up in the QA as well. Is prompt engineering the new skill set you need for building bots? Yes, kind of depending on the project and enterprise that you're working on, but it's not just for bot. I think it's the new life skill that everybody needs to have. We are all going to have a relationship with large language models in one way or other, and perhaps if you're a bot builder, you're going to be using that in your work as a bot builder, but in your personal life, in any kind of other job that you have, there's this large language model. There are many large language models that are advancing very quickly, and you're going to have a relationship with them, and that relationship comes through the prompts that you engineer for them, and you'll get a feel for it, and you'll dance with it, and yeah, it will be a part of your life. So it's not just a bot building skill, it's a life skill. One thing also, I like the cost, that comes up a lot. Would you want to run your bot on an LLM, because then you're going to be calling, let's say OpenAI's API all the time, and the cost that's part of that, or are you only using it for a small portion of it, right? Because at the end of the day, let's say I am a sneaker brand, and people can order sneakers, and then they want to kind of ask a question about their order. do I want to be calling an LLM each time, or do I just actually design that conversation, have the few integrations that I need, and it's much I have more control. It's probably cheaper in operation. So those are some of the considerations that you have, and then you might still have for your edge cases and your drop-offs, use the LLM and call that a little bit, right? But yeah, cost, control, creativity, customer expectations, they all kind of are part of the equation. And it depends on who you are and what kind of industry you're in, how you balance all those different things. Let's see, do we see anything? I see Willem is answering in the chat a lot. That's also good. Prompt engineering let's see. Let's start at the top. That's the better thing. Blind testing. How would you potentially feed hundreds of thousands of labels to an LLM for labeling? Not sure how that works. Did you address that?
It's a great question. It's so we have well, in case of ChatGPT, there's these APIs, there's these plugins, there are extensions for your Google Sheets. So 5 months ago they launched one thing, and now a couple months later suddenly we can basically use it in all these different environments. So I don't have the specific answer for you right now, but my guess is that you'll probably be able to figure this out in the next few weeks if you or a colleague on your team has some developer skills.
Yeah, so I guess if you want to check in about that, I think it's just Willem at CDISglobal.com, right? So maybe just ping a quick message to Willem, and then you can kind of talk about LinkedIn or emails. Yeah. Can we replace LLMs with?
Sorry, go ahead.
Can we replace large language models with intent, entities, and utterances? I think it's more the other way around now, right? So that's the
yeah. But again, like I would say, I wouldn't go for the approach where you replace all of those in one go, in one fell swoop. Unless perhaps you're starting out, you have a lot of budget, and you have a manager who's cool with you taking 6 to 12 months.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of people, the word hybrid model comes up, right, a lot, right? Where you've got your intent-based model, the way we've been doing it, and where you have journeys with full control, and then you've got your LLM around that to create a richer experience for people, and help with that. Or also something that comes up later in a different question: can LLMs help with disambiguation? Yes, persona or this LLMs can help with disambiguation because you could engineer the prompt that it needs to meet certain requirements. Or when somebody's logged in, if you have authenticated someone and the products, you could actually just write the prompt, figure out which one of those 3 products that somebody ordered, it will get there. So for disambiguation also helps with that. But again, is it always worth it? That's good question. Can we still apply personas with LLMs? I like that. It's a great question. So you can say, answer this, respond to this. Let's say my persona is a 30-something-year-old guy with glasses and a tweed jacket in Kenya, in front of a wooden closet and a green plant. You could say, how would this person answer this question? Right, so you can kind of inform what you want the language to be coming out of the LLM, but then you don't have full control. So what we're actually building is a language API that adds that layer of customer experience, where you could just have a filter that says, this is the tone of voice, these are the guidelines that we have, and if the output of the LLM does not meet that requirement, then we send it back. So you would have that for persona, for marketing, for compliance, all the different things that you would want. So because you still want to be in control, right? And that's the thing. It's control versus risk versus flexibility. So what are the thoughts on the security things, right? That's why we're relatively conservative. I think if you look at how stuff is developed, it starts with research, that becomes a technology, then that becomes a product, then that's something that enterprises start to deploy. And at one point, it's something enterprises have successfully deployed and their customers reap the benefits. And when you read a lot of technology news, we tend to skip a lot of those steps, right? We've done the research, we've got a technology, we've got a very preliminary product in the market now, and it's going to be a while before we get that at the level where we as an enterprise, if I'm a publicly traded company and I'm in finance or I'm in health, it's still going to be a while before I can very successfully and confidently implement these technologies. But I should start experimenting with it because it is inevitable. So when you think about the security things, there's a lot to be discovered there. There's also the EU guidance on the AI laws and all of those things. It's coming out now and it's going to go fast. But yeah, we've seen the cases of somebody, a prompt might trigger something in your set and give a response that you don't want to give, right? There's a lot of things to be discovered there. Let's see. I have zero experience in programming and AI. I want to start to learn about chatbots and its implementation. Where should I start? Is it possible to get into tech without a tech background? Oh, wow. Do we have good news for you, Guillermo? Is that how you said that? Yeah. I think a lot of the people in conversational AI don't not have necessarily have a background in technology. It's kind of coming back to the other point, right? You've got engineers building a technology, turning it into a product, and then there's enterprises trying to use that. And a lot of the people in the enterprise environment, or just conversation designers, have a background in design, in writing, in more the creative roles. A lot of people have backgrounds in customer service because they've been talking to clients all day. They know what makes a good conversation. So there's a lot of room for people with those sort of backgrounds to work in conversational AI, and particularly now also large language models. Willem, didn't you train as to be a journalist? Or you were a journalist? Yeah.
Journalist. And then I went for the big money to be earned in online copywriting. Oh my God.
Oh, wow. SEO.
No, not SEO, because that actually no. But then I became online copywriter, online editor, and then something like a little bit less than 10 years ago, there was this new wave of chatbot technology. And I was like, wow, this is actually cool.
Let's see. Transactional intents tend to be more helpful to customers than informational ones, because they're solutions. What can be done on informational intents to get a greater and more individual result without the use of APIs? But advancing, well, yeah. So how can we actually? Because now somebody asks a question, we give an answer up, and we hope they don't call, right? I think this has to do with customer experience. Customer service has been elevated, or is in that motion of being elevated in the enterprise, where it used to be sort of the bottom of the organization. That's where you go to complain and stuff, right? When people need information, we don't. Let's give them an FAQ page at least, and now we've got chatbots to deal with that. But slowly but surely, we're starting to recognize that actually giving someone an answer is the beginning of a conversation, and could be the beginning of a commercial journey. It could be the beginning of a relationship. It can help with increasing customer lifetime. So I think if you look at, how do large language models play into this, let's say, you've got your answer with a large language models. It's very easy to then turn that into a more casual conversation that either provides joy, provides more value, it helps you build a relationship, it helps you build a brand, and it might inspire or trigger someone. You can design for this to continue a different journey with you as well that becomes more transactional in one way or another. So yeah, there is a lot to be won. It's not just like, here's an answer, off you go now. What would you recommend to someone wanting to get into the conversation design world, but who doesn't have the budget? Do traineeships still exist? I think traineeships exist. One of the things that we're proud to be doing is through CDI Foundation. We have a lot of partners there, technology companies like Microsoft and Salesforce, and they donate money to our nonprofit. And we also have scholarship programs where you need to meet a few criteria, but it is possible to also get a scholarship for Conversation Design Institute. And yeah, traineeship, some organizations offer them. Maybe CDIS could be a home for you. We'll have to see. But there are routes into this field, definitely. Let's see. Cost, quality control, prompt engineering. I think we covered a lot. Oh wait, let's see. I've not been looking at the regular chat. Did we miss anything there, Willem?
I looked a little bit. I was able to grab a few, but I've probably also missed some stuff. I was thinking, I don't know if that's going to be feasible, but to make a topic on the CDI forum on this and maybe address a few more questions. I don't know if that's a good one, but that might be a cool way to sort of continue the conversation.
Yeah, let's keep it going. Yeah, we'll wrap up. Thank you, everybody. This has been very joyful and great. And thank you so much for sharing some of your precious time with us here today to talk about conversation design and conversational AI, and particularly large language models. It's great to see that there's so much interest for this, both for people figuring out what does this mean for my life, what does this mean for my skill set, for my career, but also from the organizational point of view. How do I leverage this? What should I be worried about? What should I be careful with? And what could a roadmap look like? So thank you all for being here, and thank you, Willem, for sharing your story and giving some real life examples of how enterprises are already using this. Again, if you want to learn more about this, we have an upcoming course on this, prompt engineering and conversation design. So sign up for that. There's a waiting list for that. Also, if you're an enterprise or you're looking to get started or need some help with what you're already doing, just shoot us an email. We're always there to help. Just pick our brain, because it also helps us get better and learn. So thank you all, people from around the world. And the final word to you, Willem. 1, 2, 3, and off you go.
Thanks to Oliver, Jurgen, and Guksje, and you, Hans, because this wasn't just you and me rattling off stuff that we figured out. This was a team effort.
Thank you, everybody. We'll leave the chat open. I'll leave it rolling for a little bit because a lot of people are saying goodbye, which is fun. Thank you, everybody. Thank you. And I will close off now. Have a wonderful, what is it, Wednesday? Whether this is the beginning of your day, whether it's the ending of it, enjoy it. Please be safe, and we'll see you in the next one.